Chapter 71, The War Council, Hanyu's POV. Kenta had wrapped Hanyu in blankets and spoken soothingly until he managed to calm down somewhat. Finally, he dozed off with his head on Hanyu's shoulder, but even the press of his warm body and the sound of his peaceful breaths weren't enough to settle Hanyu's racing brain. Had the screams been from Antony or Asao? Practically speaking, it would be better if it were Antony, who could recover from anything, but Hanyu flinched away from the thought just the same. Neither of them deserved to suffer like that. Not for his sake. Not at the hands of fucking Marcus. That monster didn't deserve to touch a hair on either of their heads, and he didn't care if he was a blasphemer for thinking it. But the longer Lord Theodora stayed away, the more his indignation sharpened into fear. What could possibly be taking her so long? He wasn't much reassured when she stomped into the room, her clothing streaked with an unsettling brownish-red substance. He was even more startled to see that she was towing a very confused-looking Felix in her wake. Kenta jolted awake at her thunderous entrance, startling away from Hanyu's shoulder, and she groaned. "Sorry, Kenta." She scrubbed a stained hand over her face. "I didn't mean to... Fuck. Can you go back to sleep? And Hanyu, will you come with us, please?" "Oh gods, he's dead!" Hanyu realized simultaneously that he'd spoken aloud, and that he'd no idea who he'd been referring to. Lord Theodora shook her head. "No one is dead. The three of us just need to talk. Now." "Yes, my lord." Hanyu scrambled to his feet. He felt that he should have taken a moment to return Kenta's wide-eyed stare, but the combination of his worry and Lord Theodora's tone of command had him exiting the room at her heels without so much as a backwards glance. She led them into a curtain room that Hanyu realized must be hers. Kenta had been right. It was no bigger than his. There was only space for a small wardrobe and a bed, the latter of which she now gestured towards. Hanyu obeyed at once, noticing that Felix didn't seem any more inclined to defy her than he was, settling next to Hanyu without question. Lord Theodora stayed on her feet, pacing back and forth over the few steps her cramped space allowed her, before facing them. "Marcus was beating Antony," she said roughly. "Not even beating, torturing, and I don't think it was the first time." Felix's gasp surprised Hanyu. He turned and saw the big god's eyes were wide with shock. "He what?" he demanded, his voice booming out louder than Hanyu had ever heard it. Lord Theodora nodded. "His attendant looks like he's been tortured too. He's a tight-lipped one, but I hope Julia will be able to get some kind of information out of him." "Asao was there?" Hanyu burst out. "Where is he now, my lord?" He knew he shouldn't have spoken without permission. The overwhelming concern that almost seemed to choke him was no excuse to butt into the god's conversation. However, Lord Theodora didn't even blink at his impudence, simply turning her gaze on him and addressing him in the same flat, serious tones she'd been using with Felix. "I took them both to your rooms and brought Julia to look after them," she said. "Otherwise, I would have brought her to talk with us too. Antony's in trouble, and I don't know how to fix it, but I think the three of us are the closest to him, so I hoped maybe we could figure out what's been going on and how to put a stop to it." Even through his fear, Hanyu felt a thrill of astonishment. She'd included him so easily, like an equal. "The three of us," she'd said, making Hanyu part of this us, part of this war council. Felix was shaking his head, looking dazed and bewildered, but when he spoke, it was in his usual quiet voice. "Tortured. Why don't you think this was the first time?" "It's not," Hanyu cut in again. "Marcus heard him before, not long after the battle. Antony said Marcus was pissed that he wouldn't let him trade for Kenta, but Asao said it was because he was trying to get him out of a punishment. Antony just called it rough sex and said it was what he did whenever Marcus was angry, but he looked like he was dying. He could barely move." Lord Theodora's jaw dropped, her eyes wide and stricken. It was Felix's turn to furrow his brow in thought. "So it's a pattern," he growled. "A long-standing one." "And he's awful to Asao." Hanyu was surprised at how good it felt to say all these things out loud. "He punishes him all the time, and Asao says he deserves it, but that just can't be true. He's perfect." "I've never met Asao," Felix said, looking a little ill. "I didn't attend the ceremony this year. I was busy getting Edgy settled. And Marcus never brings his attendants above deck at night when the rest of us are out. But Theo, you used the word tortured? I always thought it was carelessness and too much appetite. But do you think Marcus has been killing them on purpose?" Lord Theodora nodded, her face grim. I do. This man is in bad shape, though it was hard to tell how much was just from the fright. That bastard had been making him watch what he did to Antony, and then he and I fought in front of him. Hanyu shuddered. He couldn't imagine what it would be like to have gods fight in one of those small cabins while he was there. Poor Asao must have felt so breakable, so scared. It's my fault, my lord, he admitted as tears sprang to his eyes. I ran into Marcus's rooms, and Antony said he'd do whatever he wanted if he wouldn't punish me. Marcus made him beg for it. Lord Theodora's eyes widened. It was just the same with us. Marcus started threatening to have me flogged for attacking him, and Antony offered to make it up to him and do whatever he wanted, like it was a fucking script. Gods, Felix groaned, rubbing the back of his neck. Fuck. All right. So this has been going on for a while. He can't do that, Lord Theodora burst out, her eyes blazing so fiercely that Hanyu pulled his limbs in tight, trying to make himself smaller. Well, if Antony won't tell anyone, it'll be difficult to make him stop, Felix started, but she cut him off. It's Antony I'm talking about. What, he thinks that as long as Marcus is hurting him, it's all right? It doesn't count? How many times had Antony assured Hanyu that he could handle whatever Marcus threw at him, that he would heal right up? Felix sighed. If he's been trained to see managing Marcus's emotions and violence as his responsibility, then that's exactly what he thinks. But why? Lord Theodora yelled. That's what I don't understand. Why would Antony let him do this? The fucker was... Well, I won't say what he was doing in case Kenta's eavesdropping, but it was bad. If it's been happening for so long, why hasn't Antony just pitched him over the side of the ship? Hanyu nodded agreement. It's like she's reading my mind. However, Felix shook his head. It's not that simple, Theo. You know that. These things don't just start happening one day, and Marcus has had hundreds of years to build up to it. But why wouldn't he tell me? The god's voice was almost a wail, and Hanyu flinched at the raw hurt in it. That grouchy little asshole has to know I'd do anything for him. Oh, Theo, Felix said, so warmly that the tears burning Hanyu's eyes finally spilled over. Everyone knows you would. If he realized he was in trouble, I have no doubt he'd come to you in an instant. But I've seen relationships turn cruel, and my guess is that he doesn't even know that what's happening isn't normal or his fault. Hanyu wondered what relationship Felix was referring to. Gods, or some of the thousands of humans that had come and gone on this ship? If it were the latter, could Felix really compare the relationship between two people and two of his own kind? He didn't have time to ruminate further, because the big god was speaking again, this time more firmly. We're all going to have some very strong feelings about this, and that's more than fair, but we have to be careful not to let ourselves get distracted, he said, looking from Lord Theodora to Hanyu to his own huge hands twisting nervously at his ropes of hair. This is about Antony and Asao. They're the ones he's hurting, and they need to be our focus. A strange, heady feeling washed over Hanyu as he heard Asao included in that statement. It felt like stretching a neglected muscle and feeling the blood flowing as it should for the first time. Yes, the priest had said that it was acceptable, even an honor, for the gods to use their offerings however they chose. But if two of the gods themselves believed that there should be limits, that Asao was being wronged, then it had to be all right for Hanyu to believe the same thing. Now, if only he could get Asao to believe it too. But they both think they deserve it, he cried. I've talked to both of them about him, and they act like everything is fine. Felix was relentless. We can't tell them they're wrong about that. But they are, Lord Theodora protested. Well, of course. The bigger god gave a helpless shrug. But they already have Marcus to tell them that they're wrong about everything and can't trust their own perceptions. They don't need it from us, too. Lord Theodora huffed. Well, I say we kill him and let them sort out their feelings about the corpse afterwards. Hanyu stared at her open-mouthed. Was she really suggesting? A single glance at her calm, firm face banished any doubt. Lord Theodora really was advocating that they destroy one of her fellow gods. Hanyu was overtaken by a strange sense of vertigo. He, Hanyu, was sitting with Lord Theodora the Wave-Tamer and Lord Felix the Death-Dealer, as a more or less equal part of the discussion about whether to kill Lord Marcus, the Drinker of Souls. What mad tale had he fallen into? We can't do that. Felix's voice only slightly decreased Hanyu's feeling of unreality. We have rules. I saw what he's been getting away with, Lord Theodora replied, still deadly calm. The rules aren't working. Antony would kill us, Hanyu whispered. He wasn't sure how literally he meant that. The idea was so outlandish, he really had no framework for predicting how his master would respond. Anyhow, and how could we do it? He continued. I couldn't do anything to help, my lord. Could the two of you manage it alone? Lord Theodora's hand went to her ribcage, and she winced slightly. I couldn't, but Felix might be able to. Between the two of us, I think we could finish him, and we could get others to help once they knew what was going on. Julia looked furious when she saw them, and if we convinced her, that would mean we got Thad and Cloelia, too. No. Felix dropped his ropes of hair and clenched his hands over his knees. I won't do it. We can't solve this with more violence. But Felix, you're a war god, Hanyu protested. He'd never thought of himself as a violent person. True, he wasn't Kenta, but he'd never liked to see anyone hurting. That must have changed at some point over the course of the day. When he let his mind drift over images of Felix and Lord Theodora beating Marcus, making him bleed, pinning him down and hacking off his head, the ideas didn't fill him with the revulsion he would have expected. Instead, he felt a grimy, bloodthirsty satisfaction. Felix's hands gripped his knees even tighter. This is different. You're asking me to attack someone in cold blood with the intention of murdering him. I've never done anything so underhanded. Lord Theodora sighed. I admire that, Felix, truly. But Marcus isn't some poor defenseless human. He's a menace, and we need to put him down. Now Felix did look at them, and his face was set and grim. No, I know what I've done, but I'm not going to kill anyone I don't have to, not even Marcus. Don't have to, Lord Theodora snapped. Antony will survive until we can convince him to end the fucker legally. Asau might not. He'd better, Hanyu put in. That was part of why Marcus got so angry today, my lord. Antony said that if Asau dies, he'll get together with Felix to figure out how to punish him. Hanyu half expected the big god to be offended that his lord had used him as a threat, but instead he smiled. Really? That's wonderful. I'm glad to hear that Antony stood up for Asau. It's good to see that he's still got some backbone. I think it's more like he's finally getting it back, Hanyu said, remembering how shocked Marcus had seemed at Antony's firmness. Lord Thea burst out as if she hadn't heard any part of their exchange. So we won't kill the man. That's supposed to be enough to make me feel better? He'll still hurt him and rape him and fuck with his mind until he thanks him for all of it. I can't send him back knowing that. I brought him out with me. It was like a promise to keep him safe. We can't take Marcus's offering, Felix said heavily. He'd never let him go without a fight. And Asau would run away. Fresh tears sprang to Hanyu's eyes at the thought, but he knew he was right. First chance he got, he'd slip back to Marcus's rooms. Theodora snarled in frustration. It was a terrifying sound, but halfway through cowering, Hanyu noticed that she had tears in her eyes, too. I'm sorry, he said miserably. I was the one who got Asau and Antony both in trouble. I shouldn't have... May I interrupt? Felix's jaw was set, and he looked ready to do some snarling of his own. None of this is your fault, Hanyu. That's his game, and the three of us have to refuse to play it. We've all been talking like he's some kind of natural disaster, but he's a person with choices about how he behaves. Nothing you did could have forced Marcus to hurt Antony and Asau. He did that all on his own because he wanted to, not because of you. Hanyu wanted to argue, but just then there was a polite cough outside the curtained door. Theo? It was Bunta's voice, rough with sleepiness. Lord Julia is here. Lord Theodora whipped around and opened the flap. Bunta, hair askew, regarded the three of them with surprise. Oh, hello, Felix, Hanyu. They had barely stepped past the curtain when Lord Julia swept up to them. Hanyu dropped to his knees, but not before noticing that, though her face was calm, she was holding herself so tensely that her shoulder blades almost seemed to be tied together. Antony needs blood, she said without preamble. A great deal of it, and it won't be safe for him to drink directly from anyone. I'm going to need some donors to fill a bowl. I'll do it, Hanyu cried, jerking up to his knees and realizing too late that he hadn't had permission to raise his head. My lord? I'm not going to take it all from you, the god said sternly, though her face seemed to soften a little as she looked down at him. And I get the feeling he'd rather not have this spread around any more than it already has been, so I thought I'd ask here before going to the barracks. Hanyu cast an appealing look at Bunta, who was kneeling beside him. The older man scowled. I'll ask around for volunteers, he said, getting to his feet with another deep bow and heading down the makeshift hallway. I'm going to clean up, Lord Theodore announced, gesturing to her bloody clothes. But the four of us will talk again soon, once we've had a chance to tell you everything we've pieced together, Julia. And Felix? He raised an inquiring brow. Yes? Her face was grim and unsmiling. Promise me you'll at least give some thought to doing things my way. All right. The big god's shoulder slumped. I promise. Hanyu just hoped he wouldn't think about it too long.